What's up everyone, and welcome to another Rust electrical tutorial. I'm Austin, and today I'm going to be covering the absolute easiest way to do auto crafting. This comes as a result of a comment left on the Mini Factory where someone asked, essentially, what if I don't want all this, this fancy stuff and I just want 6 items? I'll make my own guns or I'll make my own whatever. And this is a really great way to do that. So to get started, we're going to look at just the pros and cons. The pros are that this is extremely easy to build and therefore is also very cheap to build. It has very, very low power, and the configurations that I have as the examples, they only require 15 Rust watts. And it's very, very reliable, without all the fancy stuff going on. And if it has one job, that's all it has to do. It's very reliable. And then, of course, the cons are that it is very basic. And when I say basic, I mean that it's all manual. So you're going to have to do a lot of stuff yourself if you want to change things. It's inefficient. I'll talk about why that is. It relates to the actual workbench. It has limited items, so each workbench can only do 2 items based on this easy approach. And then there's limited scaling, meaning that as you scale this up, the only way to scale it is to add workbenches. So for 6 items, I need 3 workbenches. So you can see how that could eventually kind of get out of control. So as far as the build steps, it's very, very simple. There's just 5 steps. You, of course, need to install the workbench, the industrial crafters on that workbench. You're going to need conveyors, you're going to need power and piping, and then just programming, which is just programming the recipes and things that you want to craft. And so before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and just fire this one up over here. There's a materials box right here. Obviously just kind of has admin level stuff. I spawned in these giant counts just for this. You don't need this many stacks. Nothing in here that I'm crafting really requires a bunch of stacks, but be aware of the stack thing. If it's over 60, you need multiple stacks. And so over here is where the crafted items will be. These are the items that are being crafted. Their max values here are the amounts that I want in the box. This is how you set that. This particular conveyor, which we'll cover later, is any item if you're wanting to set this up early. But these are the 6 items that we have going on here. And so to start this thing, all we got to do is just go and turn on every single conveyor, and then it will just start doing the rest. And then, so while we're covering this, it can be crafting. I can kind of show you what it looks like, but eventually when it's done, this is set up identical to that, and so it will look like this. These are the amounts that I've requested, and this is what it's crafting. Of course, you can choose any 6 items you want. It could be guns. You could have 6 AKs or whatever. It doesn't matter what you want to craft. You can choose any 6 items. These are just the items that were listed in the comment, and so I use those for the video. So now that's crafting, we're going to kind of just look at this real quick before we start the build. And this is an example of where I put this whole thing into a 1x1. It has 2 solar panels on the top and a battery, a car battery in here powering it. If you build it in the way of this video, a single car battery can craft the 6 items as shown because of one trick I did. But once this electrical update comes out here shortly that removes power from some of these switches, I believe it's removing power from these switches, you'll be able to really easily use a car battery without any tricks. But it can fit in a 1x1. This whole thing can fit as it is, and then it's sitting here on standby. If I were to say take any items, stacks of items like this, it's gonna really immediately replace those stacks, and I'll kind of talk about why it is. There they are. And so it replaced those stacks, and that's just because those stacks are sitting in these crafters. It kind of front loads a bunch of stacks here based on how it's designed. So this is both, it's kind of an unintended bonus, but you do have a little bit of a buffer. You have 4 stacks of buffer, 4 item buffer prior to this box. So you have some immediate replacement ability if you say take some stuff, and then it'll start working right now, as you can see, to replace the things that I took. So as far as build, we're going to start on that now. We're going to do, of course, the workbenches and the industrial crafters. You're going to need a workbench and 2 industrial crafters for however, every 2 items requires 1 workbench and 2 industrial crafters. And that's where when I said cons, it's inefficient. Because, again, it's 1 workbench and each industrial crafter is only dealing with 1 item. And so that's what keeps this from having blueprint swapping. It keeps it from having, things that, if you saw my mini factory and the full factory, these complex systems that are running in materials that are specific to a particular blueprint, whatever. None of that's happening here. This is the absolute easiest way to go, with the caveat that you are going to be inefficient for space. So, but I think for a lot of people, especially solo duos, this is probably a very viable option because there's not a lot of loss here. If you get raided, you can fit it all in there, and you don't have any timers or timer loops or ore switches, whatever. It's literally just conveyors. In this case, splitters for power, and the industrial crafters and some boxes. That's literally it. So as far as conveyors go, you're going to have two sides. You have the input conveyors over here, and we have the output conveyor over here. We'll start here on the output conveyor. Like I said, these are the items you want. Whatever the max value is essentially going to be what you want it to do. So I'm asking it to make at 128 a stack. That's 6 slots of 128, 768. Rockets are in stacks of 3, so 54 in stacks of 3 is 3 rows, or I think it's 18 slots. Syringes is 1 row, stacks of 2, and then of course C4 stacks and stacks of 10. So if I want a whole row of that, that's 60. And that's all I did there. You're going to keep this to any item. Don't set it to any other filter other than that. And then we're not using on any of the conveyors. We're not using any of these fails, the filter stuff, the turn on, turn off, none of it. We're only using the power input and the pass through to run power, which we'll cover last. And so that's it. So whatever your items are you're crafting, this conveyor, you have to put all those items in there so it knows to pull them out and stick them in whatever box you have designated. A point of interest, if you want to then from here go out to another conveyor, set that to a locker, build kits based off another conveyor, this is the point, or hook it up to say your sorting system. It would be from this industrial out that you do that. The input conveyors are the same in that we're not using any of the filter pass, filter fails, none of that, just power in, power out, that's it. And each of these are paired to a crafter, and in one case it's actually paired to 2 crafters. So the reason I did that is because it'll help me to fit it all under one battery. I was 1 rust watt too high to do a conveyor per crafter, which you may have to do depending on what you're doing. But after this coming up update, I don't think that's going to be a problem. You'll just have a little bit of a power savings on switches. So all I did was the output of that is running to a splitter, and I ran that splitter to the 2 conveyors on this one. And the reason I was able to do that is because the pistol bullet and the normal 5.56 round, they have the same recipe. You just get 4 pistol bullets and 3 5.56 rounds for the same recipe, which means this conveyor can just have the same recipe, which is actually 10 and 5. I'll talk about why I doubled that on some of these, but it's 10 and 5 of fragments and gunpowder. And so if I put a splitter, that conveyor is going to keep each of these stocked with whatever it's set to. So it's just a way to save a conveyor if they share the same recipe. So as far as the conveyors go, that's very simply that. Whatever the conveyor is pointed at, so we have our output of this conveyor is running to these. These are the 5.56 and the pistol rounds. A 5.56 and a pistol round have a 10 and 5. That's the max, and the max settings are the actual recipe, I should say. So whatever the recipe is, set your max values to exactly that. If it's something like a 5.56 or any of those rounds, double instead of doing 10 and 5, do 20 and 10, just double it. Because sometimes what can happen is this will take the recipe and start crafting, and then it'll be empty waiting for it to come on, and it's a little lag. So it just means it'll take a little bit longer. It's not going to break it if you put the exact recipe for ammo in here, but if you double it, it just guarantees that the recipe's waiting the next time it's ready, and there's no lag. So that's just a personal preference of mine. This next one here is this, and that's going to, if you follow it, it's going to this crafter here, which is the explosive ammo. Again, I doubled the recipe to make sure that it always had it there. It's 10, 20, and 10. So I did 20, 40, and 20 for the bullet round. Again, I just doubled that. So only thing you have to do is set your recipes on these input ones for whatever the recipe is. Make sure that the require all filter mode is set, and that's for all of these. Same thing down here, and then beyond that, just whatever it's pointed to, make sure that it matches what's in there. So this is a syringe, which means this needs to be the recipe for a syringe. This one is looks like C4, and so this one should run to one that's building C4, and it is. You'll notice in the C4 that I didn't double the recipe. It's because it takes so long to craft one that you don't need to double up the recipe. It's just things that craft really fast, like pistol bullets, that it can get, it can kind of get ahead of itself and be waiting for the recipe. And that's it. As far as coming into it, it's just 2 splitters. This splitter is just connecting this splitter to it, all connected to the inputs of these, and then that going to your materials. And this is just how they can all source from this box. Simple as that. The output is every output of every industrial crafter on here is running to one of these 6 combiner ports. Then they're filtered down into a single one, and then a single output. And that's the whole point. You just want all 6 of those into a single output to go into here so that this thing can look for the items that you're telling it and put them in there as they are ready. And that's literally it. As far as like the actual meat of it, building the conveyors, setting everything up, programming them, that's it. That's all you have to do. As far as power goes, also extremely simple. I started the power over here at this conveyor. So if you trace this power input here, this is running to this battery output here. I have two solar panels here, both connected to a root combiner, and then that root combiner into the power in here. If you're on a server that has a modified day-night cycle, so there's either no night or the night's like 5 minutes, you only need one solar panel. So if you on a vanilla server that has 15-minute nights, 45-minute days, you're probably going to need 2 solar panels if you're doing these standalone with a small battery. If you have a large battery and some kind of power system doing other stuff, all you do is set a branch out to here for 15 rust watts off of your large battery. So it depends on what you're doing. I just wanted to show you the utility that you could do this with just a couple of solar panels. A single little car battery down here runs the whole show, and you can get all this stuff for just one small car battery. So pretty cool. But you're gonna run that power to this one here. It doesn't actually matter when you start with, this just made more sense to me. And then its pass through here is running all the way down to the bottom one of this into its power input there. Its pass through then runs to the one above it. Its pass through the one above it. I'm just daisy chaining to the top. Once you get to the top, the electrical output on this last conveyor here is going to run to the however you're just distributing power. If you do it exactly like I did it, it's going to be 3 splitters. The first one it needs to have 9 arriving, very importantly, right now. If that update, and I'll cover that when it comes out, but if that update comes out and these don't require power, then you're only going to need 8 arriving here, because we need 4, or actually even less, because we only need 1 coming out of each of these. So for the purpose of this video, let's ignore that. You need 9 coming in here pre-update, because you want 4 and 4 coming out, which means you'll have 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and 1. The point is, each of these requires 1 rust watt. However you want to get those 1 rust watts to the individual industrial crafters is up to you. This is just the most efficient way currently based on how I have this set up. And they're just running, the power outs of each of these is running to any of the power in on any of the crafters. There's no order, it doesn't matter, just send power to each one of those. Again, based on what I talked about over here about the cons being basic, is that you have to turn everything on. So once you know, these are all on here, I had to turn them all on to start it. But if I had, say, had a switch, which I couldn't put a switch here right now because I'm 1 rust watt short until the update, and I shut this whole thing off and then gave it power again, the conveyors are actually going to turn back on because they have a memory as to whether they were on or off when they lost power. So they would all pop back on. Industrial crafters don't do that. So if you have a switch to this and you turn the whole system off, these are going to be off and you're going to have to turn them on. So you're going to have to manually turn on all industrial crafters, and they just stay on. The way it's designed is that you never turn this off. It just stays on the way it is, and the way you would turn it off if you wanted to change something is go through every conveyor and just turn them all off, and maybe turn off your output 1 to stop it from transferring things. That's how you would go in and work on it and do things, is by just shutting it off manually. And just some like final tips, you could do it as I did it here, and it can be any workbenches. I just want to show you that the tier 3 can all fit in there with this stuff that I sort of just crammed in here. You could do it as a 1x1 standalone like I did here. Another idea is that you could actually just spread these out around your base. You could have this workbench somewhere upstairs, this one down, whatever, and have the whole system hooked up exactly like I do, but just spread out throughout a base. That's another option if you want to have workbenches in places so that when you are manually crafting things like your, weapons or whatever. And again, you don't need to be crafting only the items that I chose here. You could have AKs, you could have rocket launchers, you could have whatever you want. I just did these again because that was what the question was on my comments of the mini factory. And then another thing to point out is that, like I showed you in there, once this thing does fill this box up, it's going to fill everything up, and then you could organize it to look like the other one. Once it fills everything up, it's going to then start filling up these slots at the bottom here in standby. So that's kind of actually sort of a benefit. As I said, it's kind of like a buffer, so you'll have this backup so that when you take items, there's up to 4 replacements that will immediately give them, and then the system will start replacing itself back here. Unless you take everything, it'll transfer everything over, and then it'll start transferring and transferring and transferring and crafting, and then eventually it'll back up essentially, and back up into here, and it crafts all these, and then it has literally an input amount ready for the next time. So, and the last thing is, before we go, is that you can, if you want, for those of you who really like organization, you can do things where if it's, while it's doing this, if you start to move stuff around, I'll start organizing this, you can move items off of their stacks where they're supposed to be, like this, and it will start placing things there once they're all organized, assuming there's no spots left anywhere else. So let me just organize this real quick and I'll show you what I mean. There, and so all I did was I just moved them into their spots, and the ones that are still missing stacks, I just moved one, I pulled one off a stack and placed it into a spot so that now it will just autofill all the spots, and once it's done, it'll be pre-organized for you. But that's just for those of you like me who like to have some serious organization. And that, folks, is just about all I've got. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below. Otherwise, you can get me on my Discord. See you later.